Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya wa mursalin sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Open Forum. You are with me, your host Enizahura Abdul Aziz, for this episode of Open Forum this evening. And we have with us Dr. Ahmad El-Muhammady, Assistant Professor at ISTAC-IIUM and also an Associate Fellow at ICCT The Hague. And we have actually invited Dr. Ahmad to talk about the first, where he have shared, important points when we talk about in understanding Islamophobia in the West. And inshallah, for this particular episode, we are going to continue to talk about this particular topic, ya Dr. Ahmad, inshallah. This is our second part of the interview. You've mentioned last week about how important for us to actually look at Islamophobia. What are the dimensions of Islamophobia that we need to understand? For us to address a particular issue, we need to look at these dimensions. You have mentioned about the religious Islamophobia, the political Islamophobia, social Islamophobia, economic Islamophobia, and epistemological Islamophobia, where you've shared that in these dimensions there are episodes of Islamophobia. There are actually concerns of Islamophobia that are being played by various actors that contributed to this problem. So we talked about how Islamophobia also exists in Muslim majority countries like Malaysia and also other countries in the Middle East. It's not a unique problem in the West, but it's also a problem in Muslim majority countries. And you've said how important for us to actually think about what are the immediate actions, what are the long-term actions that we can take, the strategy that we must undertake for us to address this issue. So for this particular series or episode, Dr. Ahmad, we are going to talk about what has happened in countries like Sweden and also Denmark, where there are episodes of Islamophobia. And I think there are other countries as well, in Europe especially, where it's a great concern when there are problems of Islamophobia. Like, for example, there are individuals in these countries who burn the Quran, desecrate the Quran under the pretext of freedom. What is your opinion on this matter, Dr. Ahmad, as an introduction to our conversation this week?
Yeah, we have seen this thing happen in Europe. Not only the first time that we have seen it, we have seen this countless time before. Mm-hmm. And it's not only happened in Europe, but also happened in other countries as well around the world, including in India, including in Southeast Asia, in Myanmar, where Islam has been subject of mockery and humiliation by other faith. And it's also happened even in Afghanistan. We have read the report actually by the independent international organization that the presence of the foreign troops in the village in Afghanistan, and they start burning Quran, they start to step on the Quran in the front of the villages in Afghanistan. It is done by the soldiers, the foreign soldiers who came to Afghanistan. They want to show that we don't care about religion, your religion, even though you regard it's a very holy religion, they don't care about it. They even pee on the mosque, for example. This is being reported. So this is not a new thing. This is not something that which is surprising happened. What we can conclude from this are the three things. We can characterize them in the three words: ignorance, provocative, and political. Meaning that they've done this because I believe that they are ignorant about this. They're ignorant in the sense that they're ignorant in terms of how important Islam is to Muslim, how important religion to us. And maybe they know about this, but they do not understand the true value of our religion to us. So Therefore, they start doing things which actually try to provoke us. That is the second point. It is very, very provocative. And I would say that it is not only provocative, it's an act of barbarism. The act of barbarism, because who actually on earth would do this to other religion? I'm going to ask you. Who on earth would do this except the barbarians? We have seen this thing happen before when Europe, under the influence of the barbarian, how the barbarian, destroy religion, how the barbarian uh, uh, sacred churches, for example, burning
Yeah.
Bibles, these kind of things. They have done this, but it is done by the barbarian. So this is not an act of the sane people, but it is act of the uncivilized people. And then the third one is political. I think that this is not, they hated Islam so badly, but this is because of the political reason. There are certain political disagreement that they have with another country, for example, but
Yeah.
Islam is not the difference. Maybe they don't like, for example, they don't like Turkey as a country, but they don't target Turkey as such, but they target Islam as a religion in order to provoke that country, in order to provoke those people, Muslim majority countries who are living in that country. So
Yeah.
these are the how can we characterize what is going on in Europe and elsewhere around the world today?
But the arguments, especially for those who are there and supporting, giving green lights, or giving support to this kind of actions, done under the pretext of freedom, as what I've said earlier. What do you think about this aspect of freedom of expression that actually brings about this acts of Islamophobia?
Uh, yes, the Western world, the Scandinavian countries, for example, it is known for human rights, for the champion of human rights, for the freedom that they cherish, and it's become part of their society, part of their values, part of their political system, part of their culture, and so on. And it is good. And actually, the reason why Muslim is so eager, is so excited to migrate to the Western world is because of the freedom. So who actually don't like freedom? But freedom comes with responsibility. I
Yeah.
think what we are doing, what happening in Europe right now, is actually a deviant form of freedom. I would say a deviant form.
Yeah.
Freedom in the beginning, initially, is a good thing. It is
Yeah.
cherished by humanity. Basically, all human beings love freedom. They need freedom to grow, and it is an important things to being human. The freedom of movement, the freedom
Yeah.
to things, the freedom to say, but there is responsibility definitely.
Yeah.
However, whenever certain people take this freedom to the extreme, it's become a deviant form of freedom. What is the deviant form of freedom? Feed the deviant form of freedom is irresponsible, the freedom without the sense of responsibility, meaning that unlimited freedom or unfettered freedom, you can do whatever you want, even though at the cost of humans' life, at the cost of public interest, at
Yeah.
the cost of certain sacred thing that we have to protect. So this is the deviant form of freedom that we are talking about is taking place in Scandinavian country in Europe. That's number one. Number two, I would say, what we're talking about here is a selective application of freedom. Not only deviant form of freedom, but also selective, meaning that it is only applicable when it comes to desecrating or humiliating of religion of Islam. But you cannot do this to Christianity. I mean, if somebody want to do this same thing to Christianity, I think it's going to be, they're going to cry at the top of their lung about this is deviant form of freedom, or this is radicalization, this is the act of terror, and so on. But they did not say this when it comes to Islam. I think this is a selective application of freedom of an expression. So I think this is something that we see, even though whatever justification they try to give, they said we have to balance between this and that and so on, but this is unacceptable. That is the reason why recently United Nations making a resolution making it illegal to burn the holy books. All human beings, which is actually having normal human being, rational human being, cannot accept this. You cannot give any justification to demean, to humiliate other religion, to desecrate other religion. This is simply unacceptable. So that's my point.
Okay, you've rightly mentioned that it's actually because of being provocative. It's actually a provocative action that brings about demonstration by Muslims, for example, in the West against these acts. Talking about demonstration, when we are against this actions of Islamophobic, for example, burning of the Quran, of the holy books, and so on. What is the effective and impactful way to demonstrate our disagreement to the actions of individuals and states that allow such acts? I know that the immediate action taken by government, by our government, is to call, ambassadors, high commissioners from countries which allow this act against Islam, for example. So do you think these are the effective way by state? What is more impactful from your point of view?
Well, I want to mention 3 points here. Number one is we have to exercise self-restraint when it comes to this kind of emotional issues like this. Self-restraint is important because we do not want to do something which is beyond constitution, which is equally despicable. We do not want to provoke people into people doing something which is violent, for example. We're not going to do that. So we need to exercise self-restraint. We cannot, because when it comes to religion, people can actually lose their sanity and doing something which is unthinkable. That is number one. Number two, what I can describe is this. What we have done so far is a kind of reactive approach. Whenever there are cases happen, we react to that. We call the ambassadors, we protest, and then we demonstrate and so on. To me, is a reactive approaches. Then it has limited effect. It has maybe it has certain effect. They're so scared that the Muslim actually get together and condemning them, and they're scared. For that country may be scared because that is going to be discussed at the United Nations General Assembly. Yes, there may be certain effect to that. Yes, but what we need to do is number three is a proactive approach. We need to be taking a proactive approach, proactive measure in order to deal with Islamophobia. What does it mean by is a proactive measures? We need a long-term strategy to deal with this. What are the example of this? I proposed recently that we need to identify key messages, parliamentarian, journalists from Europe, and invite them to visit Muslim countries and to see by themselves what we are doing here. Whether or not we are actually Islamophobia, there are, Muslims are promoting violence, pro-Muslim, the extremists. So bring them here to see what are the things being done in Malaysia with regards to peaceful coexistence, the inter-ethnic relation, for example, the nature of Islam being practiced here in Malaysia, the mosque and the church coexist together in one locality. For example, in Brickfield, we have mosque, we have Sikh Gurdwara there. we have the temple, and there are so many other religious places too. So the example, I mean, the best example that we can bring here is bring them to Malaysia, and then bring them to, for example, in Qatar, in UAE. We have a different version of Islam. This is something that we never do. We also do not have, for example, a group of movement, for example, peace movement. Recently, we heard about the Me movement. You know, Me movement actually spread across the world. We perhaps need to create similar kind of movement. Maybe we can call this a Salam movement or peace movement. Every time that we need to gather ourselves from the entire city around the world, that we are peaceful religion, we are peaceful people. There are billions of people, Muslim, around the world. But when someone is committing a bad things, the entire Muslim got affected. We need to do something, get together and create a kind of movement. But I think after all, I mean, at the end of it, the framework laid down by the Prophet is very important. That is continuous engagement of da'wah, continuous engagement of talking to each other. If you look at the Prophet went down to the market every day, meeting with who?
Yeah.
Meeting with Abu Jahal, Abu Lahab, and the Mushrikun in the market. Continuous engagement. They keep saying bad thing about Islam. They keep saying a bad thing about the Prophet. They keep saying a bad thing about the companion and so on. But the da'wah activities continues. Activities continues, and it never stops. And this is done continuously. The Prophet went over to Ta'if, da'wah again, meaning that face to face, person to person, meeting, talk, discuss, correcting perception, convey the messages. Have we done this thing? I think the idea of bringing the parliamentarian from Europe, for example, is one of the stepping stones that we can use, that we can do. Maybe we can start organizing internally first. Maybe we can organize a special program for people of different faith, visiting mosques, for example, or visiting IKIM, maybe. Bring them to visit the IKIM and to give explanation about what we do here, the role. Then conversation can take place. The problem is there is no conversations taking place. So that's my view.
Yeah, interesting when you said about the continuous engagement of da'wah, should be modeled upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam approach towards the mushrikun, especially those people who are constantly against him. And also about the peace movement, maybe we should start, having this hashtag As-Salam movement, as you have mentioned. Inshallah, Ahmad. We've mentioned about how individuals' action under the name of freedom, instigate hatred against the religion of Islam, for example. Would you categorize such actions as being a form of extremism? We only look at extremism in one sense, how terrorists in their approach, especially politically motivated towards bringing about change in governments. But what about the actions of individuals like this under the pretext of freedom, but they bring about the feelings of hatred towards others? Is this a form of extremism, Dr. Ahmad?
Yes, I agree with you. This is another form of extremism. This is another form of radical individual or radicalized individual, meaning that the person has gone through a process of radicalization. But the process of radicalization, meaning that the adoption of radical ideas about certain things, and it's manifested in the form of action like this. Definitely, if we put them, if we compare them with how terrorists, for example, become terrorists, how individuals become terrorists, they go similar process. The person that we're talking about here, burning of the Quran, step on the Quran, tear down the Quran and so on. This is a form of extremism, and it is very, very dangerous. Why? Because it's going to invite, it's going to generate, it's going to incite counter radicalization, meaning that is going to cause other people to do the same thing. Do you know in the hadith mentioned that you cannot say bad things about other people's God. You cannot curse other people's God because they're going to curse your God. Right? So that what the Prophet advised us. Similar thing, we don't do this kind of thing to other religion because that is going to invite other people to curse our religion. So that's why, as I mentioned earlier, self-restraint is important. Because if there is no self-restraint, everybody is going to become extremist. So definitely, as you clearly stated just now, this is another type or another form of extremism in our society that we have to deal with.
Your experience as someone who's, you've basically directly engaged with former terrorists. Do you see that the message of how they are against people who do not accept Islam and that feel their actions of being extremists? What is your experience with regard to terrorists and how the de-radicalization process take place? You've mentioned about radical thinkings and so on. Can you just share with our listeners about this?
Well, actually, I'm being radical. I mean, somebody being radicalized, as I mentioned, in the context of terrorists, for example, they go through certain stages and become radicalized and therefore take action based on that. Similar thing happened to those people who having a certain hatred toward Islam, toward Muslim. They also gone through the similar process. Now, the question would be, if we have this type of people, can we cure them? Can we rehabilitate them? That's the question. Well, in my view, yes, we can actually. We can because our religion, our tradition taught us whatever happened, there always a second chance. There always an opportunity for change. We are taught to be optimistic actually. Muslims are taught to be highly optimistic. We are optimistic people. In the hadith mentioned, if the world is going to an end and you have like the seed of our date, you have to plant it and leave it to God to decide what's next. Okay, now when we talk about individual like this, we do not know what's going to happen because hidayah, guidance, it is not in our hands but in the hands of God. Our responsibility is to convey the message, is to impart knowledge, is to engage. If the prophets do not have this kind of understanding, meaning that if the prophet do not have optimism in his da'wah, he has abandoned his da'wah right out. Because when he found himself to be he was in the desert. He was in the whole desert of the Arabia. You know, when I first time arrived in Saudi Arabia, I look at this is the land where the prophet performed the da'wah. I was like, my goodness, if I am living in that age, I would do not know what to do. But the prophet is so optimistic. He said that my job is to convey the message. Whatever happened next, whatever happened tomorrow, is not in my hands. And I think that is the similar approach that we have to take. The activities, the process of da'wah, the process of conveying the message, correcting the perception is a continuous process. A continuous engagement needs to be done. What happened next, we do not know. That is the approach that we have to take. Sometimes we do not see the result immediately, but the next generation will see the result. Because we are talking about generational problem, meaning that the problem created by the previous generation is going to be experienced by the next generation. Just like why we have Islam today is because the past generation has done a good job, like disseminating or spreading the message of Islam. Today we receive it. And in a similar manner, we have to do something based on our capacity, and we leave it to Allah to decide what next. I think that is the approach and the mindset that we have to take in order to deal with Islamophobia.
Okay, Alhamdulillah, Dr. Ahmad. I think I wanted to ask you, how do we address this form of Islamophobia? But from what you have said, being optimistic, towards people and the potential that people have to change is one understanding that we must have as Muslims. You've rightly said about how Prophet Muhammad SAW in his da'wah, in his sending the message across the world, not just to individuals but also to leaders of states when he was leading Medina, is also examples that we must emulate and we must model upon. So maybe as a conclusion to our conversation this evening, Dr. Ahmad, about the topic, understanding Islamophobia in the West, if you can conclude our conversation, Dr. Ahmad.
Well, I would like to say as the final words that I was inspired by the prophetic works, by the prophetic tradition, who has sent the message of Islam to anybody during his time. As you rightly stated just now, he has conveyed the message to the people on the streets, to the people on the market, to his family, to his friend, to his circles, and most importantly, to leaders, to the statesmen, to the Roman emperor, to the Persian emperor. Have we done this? Have we invited the great leaders to see what Islam is all about? That's why I proposed just now the idea of bringing Western politicians for a special program, for a special trip, maybe 5-10 days trip, to see what we are doing here. Not to try to convert them to Islam. If they convert to Islam, alhamdulillah, but just to see, like, this is what our religion is all about. And the message that they receive is not accurate. Not to say not entirely true, but it's not accurate. So we are presenting the right path. I think this is the final remark from me. And another one is the combating Islamophobia is the job of everyone according to their capacity. If you are intellectuals, you have your role. If you are the ordinary citizen, you have your role. If you're a writer, you have your role. If you're organization, you have your role. I think that if everybody play their role, inshallah, we can do this thing together. It is not the one man's job. And if we have this kind of perception, I think we are going to be defeated in day one. It is a collective, and is a collective job, is a kind of, they call it amal jama'i job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad El-Muhammady, for your insight on this particular topic, understanding Islamophobia in the West. And we actually would like to congratulate you for your extensive work, for your excellent work in this particular issue of combating extremism, terrorism, and also addressing the issue of Islamophobia. We see the kind of experience and the kind of knowledge that you have sharing with us is based on your direct experience on this particular area. Thank you again, Dr. Ahmad, for accepting our invitation and for being with us. With that, our fellow listeners, I thank you for tuning in to IKIM Radio, and also, inshallah, we'll meet again next week in another episode of Open Forum. With that, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.